Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going on a journey back in time to ancient China. Don't worry, no need to pack your bags. We've got just the thing. Arthur Waley's brilliant book, The Way and Its Power.
Yes.
We're diving headfirst into the Tao Te Ching, that text that's practically bursting at the seams with wisdom.
Absolutely.
And before you think ancient philosophy is, just for dusty libraries and scholars, think again, this deep dive is for anyone, really. Have you ever felt a little lost in our chaotic world? Or maybe you're curious about what true leadership actually looks like. Or maybe you're just intrigued by how a text from centuries ago could still hold so much relevance today. If any of that resonates, you're in the right place.
Well, what makes Waley's work so captivating, at least for me, is how he doesn't just translate the words. He pulls back the curtain on 4th and 3rd century BC China. It's not just reading, it's like stepping right into that world.
Totally. It's like hopping in a time machine. And wasn't that a time of massive upheaval in China? Almost like, if you can imagine, like a social media explosion, but with scrolls instead of news feeds? What was going on? What was shifting in their world?
Right, it's all there in Waley's book. He lays out this, it was a transition from what he calls an auguristic, sacrificial worldview to a more, how do I put it, moralistic one. So picture this. You've got this society that's totally fixated on rituals, on appeasing ancestors. That's the whole auguristic sacrificial thing. But then around the time the Tao Te Ching appears on the scene, there's this surge of interest in, morality, in virtue. It becomes central to life, to how they thought about leadership. Like the very foundation of their world was shifting.
Wow, it's like a seismic shift. So like any good revolution, I'm guessing there were some pretty lively debates going on, right?
Yeah.
With different schools of thought battling it out, each with their own take on, the right way to live, the right way to lead.
Yeah.
Waley talks about the hedonists, the quietists, and the realists. Can you tell us more about these philosophical players?
Oh, absolutely. Picture the hedonists as let's just say they knew how to have a good time. Pleasure above all else was their motto. And then you've got the quietists, kind of like the ancient version of mindfulness gurus. They were all about inner peace, self-reflection. But it's the realists who really steal the show in this story. They were the pragmatists, obsessed with law and order. Imagine them as the architects of a society built on rules and regulations.
Okay, I'm already sensing some tension here. So who were these realists, and what's their connection to the Tao Te Ching?
Well, they were all about practicality. They firmly believed that a strong, stable state governed by a very clear set of laws was the key to, everything: order, prosperity, you name it. And this is where the Tao Te Ching steps in with its own perspective, gentle but powerful. It offers perhaps a counterpoint to this rigid, law-based approach. See, Waley argues that the Tao Te Ching came about as a direct response to the realists, suggesting a different path.
So it's almost like the Tao Te Ching is saying, hey, hold on a minute. There's more to life than just following the rules.
Chuckles.
And you know what? That's a message that still resonates today. It's like the Tao Te Ching is whispering, hey, what if there's a different way to do this whole life thing, a path that doesn't require so much, force. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's dive into the core concepts here.
Yeah.
We've got Pao, Te, and the one that always makes me scratch my head a little, Wu Wei. Where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because these concepts always remind me of those beautifully wrapped presents. You're not quite sure what's inside until you start peeling back the layers.
Ooh, I like that.
And the beauty of the Tao Te Ching is that it really embraces paradox. It encourages us to hold these seemingly contradictory ideas in our minds at the same time.
Okay, so let's start unwrapping, shall we? First up, Pao. I often think of it as the way, but what does that actually mean in this context? It can feel a little, abstract, to be honest.
Right, it's not like a road you can just, hop in your car and drive down.
Exactly.
Waley translates Tao as the ultimate reality, that essence that kind of underpins everything around us. Think of it like the undercurrent of a really powerful river.
Okay.
On the surface, you see the water rushing by, the current's changing, but underneath it all, there's this deeper force that's driving everything. That's the Tao.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So if the Tao is this underlying force, this river, where does Te fit into all of this?
So think of Te as the energy that we can access when we align ourselves with the Tao.
Okay.
Waley translates it as virtue or power, but not in the traditional sense. It's not about, dominating others or anything like that. It's more about tapping into this effortless power of the universe. Imagine a sailboat harnessing the wind. It's not about forcing the wind, but understanding its power and moving with it. That's Tao.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so instead of trying to impose our will on the world, it's about understanding this larger force and aligning ourselves with it. Which brings us to, the big one, Wu Wei.
Right.
It's often translated as non-action, but that never really made sense to me. How can you accomplish anything by doing nothing?
You're hitting on something really key there. It's not about being passive. Wu Wei is about effortless action, acting in perfect harmony with the Tao. Think of like a really skilled chef. They make it look effortless, right?
Totally.
But it comes from years of practice, understanding their ingredients and moving in flow with the process. That's Wu Wei in action.
And that's what I love about Whaley's analysis. He doesn't just define these terms. He helps us actually understand how they apply to our lives, in a practical way. So how can we use these concepts, these tools of Tao, Te, and Wu Wei to navigate our modern world? It's not exactly ancient China out there.
All right. Well, think about a challenge that you're facing right now. Could be at work, in a relationship, even just a personal goal you're working towards. Now, instead of forcing a solution, what if you approached it with Wu Wei? With that effortless action?
So instead of wrestling with the problem head on, we take a step back. We observe the situation, and then we act with intention, guided by a deeper understanding.
You've got it. And that's where the real power of the Tao Te Ching comes alive.
Yeah.
It's not about giving us all the answers, but guiding us toward a more harmonious way of being in the world.
So we're learning to ride the wave instead of constantly fighting the current. I like it. But with the text as old and debated as the Tao Te Ching, has Whaley's analysis faced any, pushback from other scholars?
Oh, absolutely. And that's part of what makes engaging with a text like this so fascinating. It sparks this ongoing dialogue and debate that spans centuries, really. One of the main points of contention revolves around the dating of the Tao Te Ching itself.
Right, because Whaley places it somewhere around the 4th century BC, if I remember correctly. What are other scholars saying?
Yeah, Whaley's dating relies pretty heavily on things like linguistic analysis and his understanding of the philosophical climate of that era. But more recently, there's been some scholarship suggesting a later date.
Like, how much later are we talking about?
Well, possibly even during the Han Dynasty, which would put it closer to 200 BC.
Wow. Okay, so a couple of 100 years difference. Why does that matter so much? Why is the exact dating such a big deal for scholars?
It might seem like a small detail, but it actually has a pretty significant impact on how we understand the text's historical context.
How so?
Well, for example, a later date might suggest influences that Whaley didn't really have the opportunity to explore. There's been some interesting discussion about potential connections between Taoist practices and Adian yoga traditions.
Oh, wow. I never would have thought about that.
It opens up this whole other layer of inquiry.
So it's not just about what the Tao Te Ching says, but when it says it.
Exactly.
It's like we're constantly discovering new layers of meaning.
And that's what's so thought-provoking about Whaley's work. While it's brilliant, it also encourages us, as readers, to dig even deeper, to explore those alternative perspectives and interpretation.
Right, to question.
Exactly. For instance, some scholars have pointed out that certain passages in the Tao Te Ching, particularly those dealing with breath control and meditation, bear some striking similarities to practices found in Indian yoga.
Oh, interesting.
It really makes you wonder about the possibility of cultural exchange and the way these ideas might have traveled and influenced each other. But for our listeners who are maybe just starting to explore the Tao Te Ching, what's the one thing they should take away from it all? What makes this ancient text so enduringly appealing?
It's a great question.
I think at its core, the Tao Te Ching isn't a rule book. It's more like a compass.
I like that.
It doesn't hand us all the answers on a silver platter, but it invites us on this lifelong journey of self-discovery. It encourages us to embrace those paradoxes that we talked about earlier and to ultimately find our own way.
To carve our own path.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so powerful about it.
Yeah.
It reminds us that true wisdom isn't about having all the answers, but about aligning ourselves with something larger than ourselves. Tapping into that source of wisdom that's always been within us.
Beautifully said. It's about learning to dance with life, not trying to control every single step.
Yes.
What a beautiful way to approach, everything. This has been such an enlightening deep dive. Arthur Whaley's The Way and Its Power really does open a doorway to the timeless wisdom of the Tao Te Ching.
It absolutely does. It's a journey worth taking. And remember, the Tao Te Ching isn't really about reaching some final destination. It's about embracing the journey itself, with
Yeah.
all its twists and turns and unexpected discoveries.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Tao Te Ching. We encourage you to keep exploring this ancient text, to uncover its hidden depths, and to discover your own interpretation of its timeless wisdom.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.